Hi, I'm back. Next I'm going to talk about the body-media relationship using a different historical example, that of spirit photography, also from the bizarre Victorian era. I feel like there's so many examples in this course of how weird the Victorians were. They're so weird. Like, what was going on back then? What was in the water? But yeah, they were super duper weird. So next I'm going to talk about the history of seances, spiritualism, and ghost photography, again at around the dawn of photography as a medium. And this was around the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. So early spiritualists and mediums were, people who believed in the afterlife and that it could be contacted through certain means. They began to use photography in order to prove the existence of the paranormal and of ghosts. And the resultant photographs belong to a really weird genre called ghost photography, which was mostly created by producing these illusions by playing around with double exposure in photography. And the practices of ghost photography persist to today, with people claiming to, depending on what you believe, claiming to kind of prove the existence of the paranormal through capturing it via digital photograph. And of course, this is a big trope in horror films where, there's like a photo of someone's face that is skewed, and they're supposed to be cursed or something, a family portrait, but then something's in the shadow behind them. These are all sort of descendants of this tradition that starts around the Victorian era. And sometimes they would be family portraits with the image of the deceased hovering about in the background. Of course, there were naysayers at the time, which led spiritualists to offer up more potent and credible imagery that showed physical manifestations of the paranormal. And these took the form of photographs of female mediums with ectoplasm, a gooey, viscous white liquid that leaked out of orifices. So these effects were mostly done by adhering strips of gauze and fabric to the medium during the photograph. So these were obviously highly sexualized, and photographs that portrayed the female body as dangerous, as out of control, much like the beliefs around hysteria that we were kind of talking about. But they were just expressed in a different way using photography here. And through it's not the institution of a hospital, it's the institution of a sort of a cultural practice. The antecedents of this strange tradition can be found today in claims that photographs capture orbs, ghosts, and spirits. Its birth, however, at this moment in time was related to a few kind of social contexts. So why was this happening at this particular historical point? There are a few answers for that. So the women's suffrage was happening, or the first wave of feminism in the late 19th century, early 20th century, which was basically arguing for the right to vote in Western sort of worlds. Around this time, women had some strange forms of positions of power in seance circles as the primary mediums. And even today, in sort of depictions of seances, it's always a woman who is in charge of contacting the other side. So you might even say that in spiritualist circles, women had were afforded positions of authority that they wouldn't normally have. And this kind of went hand in hand with the suffragette movement of the time. There's an argument to be had that women's suffrage as a woman and women spiritualist leaders were co-determinative, meaning they went hand in hand. One couldn't happen without the other, and they were both part of a general shift in society, giving women more political power. In addition to that, you have a dramatically different set of technologies that are coming onto the scene, including the train, including photography, including cinema, including the telephone and the telegraph. And all of these are really messing with people's ideas of space and time and collapsing them in dramatic ways. At the same time, you have increasing urbanization in the Western world. So all of these sort of social changes are happening at the same time. And these sort of various pressures in the historical contexts yield something like the spiritualist movement and its incorporation of photography. So let's ask a different question though. Why are new technologies always paired with ghost stories? It's because new technologies generally change our perceptions of the world and render visible things that were already a part of the fabric of our reality that we didn't have the capacity to see before. So indeed, the sort of debate of what's real and what's fake in media representation usually revolves around the capacities of that medium, not the event itself. So people who argue about the moon landing being staged will argue far more about film and making a film than they will about the actual event itself. So sort of discussions about technology are usually sort of sites for working through social insecurity or questioning, underlying civic unrest, inequities in society. Those can be sort of manifest through interrogations into the limits of a medium technology, including its application to capturing the paranormal. When these sort of pictures or footage of the paranormal, or when they're scrutinized, usually critics will have very in-depth discussions about the limitations and the kind of capacities of the camera and of the camera, whether photography or kind of cinematic. So I think it's interesting how this sort of culture of capturing the unreal or something that is, just beyond our realm, always goes back to people talking about technology when it comes right down to it. These are ways that people sort of grapple with a new technology entering the scene, is telling ghost stories about it. And oddly enough, usually women's bodies are the stage upon which the violent and pleasurable potentials of new technologies play out. And there's a whole literature on this relationship, on how women's bodies are often used to work through social discomfort and reckonings with new media technologies. I think this takes the form of debates on the selfie today, is that, we are sort of grappling with the instantaneity of digital technology and its capacities for sort of warping reality through landing and criticism and scrutinizing feminine beauty online, or the way that women either fit into or don't fit into that model of beauty. And a particular kind of example comes to mind. I was watching these sort of transformation videos of makeup transformation videos of a sort of a girl without makeup, and then you see her with makeup, and there's like a fast sort of time lapse footage of her putting all her makeup, and then next to it was male reactions to the transformation, and they're always one of horror and shock and like abject horror at the kind of illusion So this is what we're dealing with here. We're kind of dealing with social sort of reactions of horror at women's bodies and their capacities to kind of to deliver illusions through new media technology. And it's not unlike this strange history of ghost photography and strange history of documenting hysteria, where people had the same, they're photographing women in hysterical fits and people were going, ugh, like gross. It's similar thing. People are working through their kind of fears of photography, various kind of stages, levels of advanced photography via the female form. So it's interesting that that's a kind of a pattern. Other media technologies have been attributed ghostly patterns upon their invention and social mainstreamification. So Jeffrey Sconce writes about the haunted telegraph that could talk to the dead. At the dawn of television, there were claims of television getting inside people's heads or minds, or images remaining frozen on television screens, even when the set got unplugged. In fact, stories of people shooting their own newly acquired television sets became somewhat of a recurrence in newspapers, magazines, and film. So the paranormal freaky powers of television extend into the late 20th century and are revitalized with the invention of VHS technology. And these are these fears around VHS are adhered to the female body in different ways through an example like the Ring franchise, which centers on, a haunted little girl who is somehow connected to a VHS sort of haunted tape of her. Similarly, fears around surveillance technology are played out through the female body in Paranormal Activity franchise. So it's very much about sort of surveillance media and our discomfort with surveillance media. And this is really mapped out by the kind of physical transformations of this, the female kind of body in those movies. Another contemporary example of this discomfort with new media technology and how it's really coupled with the female body is Cam Girl, which is a really interesting movie about a cam girl whose image is sort of co-opted and stolen. Her account is co-opted and stolen from her and sort of like piloted by a doppelganger, someone who looks exactly like her. So in short, ghost stories tend to cohere fears around new technologies around the female body and its out of controlness, or whatever fears there are around its sort of capacities. So Barbara Creed, why might this be? Why are we mapping new media technology fears to the female form? And some scholars say, well, the female body is seen to be as fundamentally abject and gross. So Barbara Creed explores the fears around women's bodies in her book called Monstrous Feminine, in which she argues that women's bodies are unique because they highlight boundary crossing and the porousness of the human body to begin with. So a lot of sort of culture and society is about maintaining boundaries, but in society, including inside and outside the body and outside the body. You're not meant to kind of blend those two. Otherwise, something's gone wrong. But women's bodies kind of tend to push that boundary and blur it through, they menstruate, they bear children, they secrete, they lactate, and all of this freaks people out. It freaks them out. So many media belonging to the horror genre revolve around the porousness of women's bodies and their frightening capacities to cross these boundaries, including The Exorcist, where she's she's projectile vomiting all over the place and bleeding and sweating and spitting. Teeth is another one. Let the Right One In, Descent, all of Cronenberg's films and other kind of horror films as well. So All this is to say that new media technology and the body, particularly the female body, are deeply entangled. If you can think of a horror film that really weds the male body to sort of media technology and sort of boundary crossing and sort of grossness, please refer it to me, because I'd love to hear about it. One that comes to mind is antiviral, a world in which it's considered chic to kind of get the same virus that a celebrity has, so people actually pay money to kind of get Charlize Theron's herpes or whatever. And if you have other examples of that, where the male body is kind of depicted as gross and leaky, and that's somehow connected to media, send them along. So let's retrace our steps in the seminar videos this week. So we began by exploring the body-medium technology relationship through the process of photographing hysteria in the medical profession. And this served as an example of how professional uses of new media technology actually inform the diagnosis and formation of some illness. In turn, it showed how women under Dr. Charcot's treatment also played into the formation of hysteria by responding in certain ways to the camera. And this example shows how new technology and our social understandings of the body are connected and entangled. Then we moved on to spirit photography, which again shows how our conceptions of the body and new media technology's uses in recording that body are always codependent. In other words, the media means for documenting the body, and our ideas about the body are always in conversation. In particular, this example cements this strange, historically consistent pattern that women's bodies, in particular their perceived porousness or unruliness, are a primary site for society working through understanding new media technology and social fears. So these two histories might have a few applications to your projects that I wanted to kind of review. You might ask, how does my media technology construct the human body? Meaning, how does it produce an idea of the human body just by being there and being used? Does the design itself produce a certain idea of the human body? Perhaps it's the filters you're proposing, for example, which definitely produce a kind of a body, an idea of a body. How does my project measure the human body, if applicable? So does your project track or quantify the body? And to what extent is that in and of itself reproducing a certain understanding of bodies rather than measuring behavior that you believe to be independent of your project? So does your tracking of a body actually reproduce a certain kind of body? Does your tracking of a body actually produce a new understanding of the body? Both of those are interesting and important questions to ask. Does my project reinforce pervasive understandings of the gendered body, women as leaky and men as intact? Or does it challenge these understandings? So, if so, how does it do this? So does the project encourage social fears around the female body? Does it assume things about the male body? What might it look like for it to view the male body as leaky and potentially dangerous and the female body as intact and whole? Not that this is the answer to equality exactly. Inversion is never really the answer to any kind of problematic gender pattern, but it might be interesting to ask. Do you want to emphasize and play into the perception of leaky female bodies in your project. So do you want to take this thing that's generally considered to be gross and go and run with it and make it grosser? That's another kind of way of interacting with, cultural ideas of femininity. You can also ask, how can I harness or intervene in society's fears around the human body in positive or productive ways in my project? Do you want to incite fears around the human body and its relationship to technology, or only in order to then suppress or trump them? This is another question you might ask in your projects. But I guess at the end of the day, all of this is saying that society is generally grossed out by bodies, unfortunately. And we explore this grossed outness through new media technologies at the time. We also explore our fears around new media technologies at the time by documenting and measuring our bodies in weird ways. Usually women's bodies are the ones that are kind of subjected to the most scrutiny in this process. This is a pattern. It happens. And it's good to be kind of mindful of it. Whenever we have a new technology that comes onto the scene, you might want to ask, okay, well, all right, how is it gonna, where are the ghost stories coming from? What kind of ghost stories are gonna be told? And how are they gonna be somehow sutured to women in some weird way? I think these are questions that are worth asking for in your projects, because so many of you have body related projects, everything from pillows that are used to kind of give you certain dreams, to sort of chips inside brains that play music. I've heard all sorts of interesting, very bodily sort of machines that you're going to want to think about what kind of gendered sort of aspects are there, if applicable. What kind of fears might be there around this new technology, and what are the power dynamics that you're looking at in terms of how you're constructing the body, and what kind of body you are putting into society through your new technology. Okay, I'll see you in class. Bye.